Guys, so I just wanted to give a quick summary of an article that recently came out in the Proceedings of National Academy of Sciences about a topic called nutrient dilution. So it was published by a relatively well-known group of ecologists from the University of Oklahoma, University of Illinois, Kansas State University, and basically what they did was they monitored grasshopper populations over the past 20 years in a tallgrass prairie habitat in Kansas and found significant declines, about 2% per year, all right, every year. And they found that the reason these grasshoppers were disappearing partly had to do with the fact with climate change, climate cycles in particular, such as the El Nino Southern Oscillation, the North Atlantic Oscillation, and the Pacific Decadal Oscillation. So these are just different climate cycles that affect rainfall, humidity, temperature in this area. But so that accounted for 40 to 54% of the declines in these grasshoppers. All right. By the way, we're talking about a decline of probably 40 to 60% of the population, pretty significant, all right, over the past 20 years. So the question is, why are these grasshoppers disappearing? Climate cycles are explaining part of it, but what's the remainder of that reason, okay? So they tested this theory called nutrient dilution. And nutrient dilution, this theory says that as you have higher concentrations of carbon in the atmosphere, that's going to manifest in increased plant productivity, all right, because carbon is good for plants, it helps plants grow, but decreasing concentrations of minerals. So the plants take up more carbon, but the levels of essential dietary minerals decrease over time because it's not taking up levels of these minerals at the same rate as they're taking up carbon. So they found that grass biomass doubled, but foliar concentrations, so concentrations of nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium, and sodium in these grasses decreased over the same period, and this decrease accounted for 25% of the variation in grasshopper abundance over 20 years. So this is pretty major, pretty important. They explore this a little bit more. I'm not going to go into the article itself. You do need a subscription to the journal in order to access it, of course. But if you go into the supplementary information, there's some good information here. So as you can see, plant biomass increased. If you look at the scale, so you start out with about 150 to 200 grams per square meter per year of grasses, and that increased over time, so it approximately doubled to around 300 grams per square meter per year. So grass biomass doubled over 20 years. There's some other good graphs. Here's the other thing that is really important. These graphs right here, these are concentrations of elemental nutrients in the end of the growing season grass tissue from this watershed over time, all right? So this is nitrogen content, decreased from 0.7% to 0.4%, all right? 40% decline. Phosphorus, 1100 ppm to 600 ppm. So phosphorus concentrations in grasses decreased by a factor of 2. Potassium concentrations went from 10,000 to just above 5,000. So potassium levels went down by a factor of 2. Sodium levels went from 60 ppm to 20 ppm over the past 20 years, while magnesium concentrations increased. Why that's going on, I have no idea. But again, these are really important minerals and nutrients in grasses for any herbivore, any insect or wildlife species that gets their nutrition from grasses, how is this going to affect them? And not only that, this is us around 2018 when the study ended, 2020. In the next 10 years, how are these levels, where are these levels going to be? What happens, I mean, by this rate, sodium levels are going to be down near zero in the next 10 to 15 years. Nitrogen levels, pretty similar. Phosphorus levels as well, okay? In the next 25 to 30 years, these grasses are going to have no nutritional value. So you might say, okay, this is one example, one study that was done in a prairie in Kansas, right? Big deal. What does that mean to me? So the authors did some additional research and literature review, a good amount of modeling, statistical analyses, principal component analyses, which I won't get into. But if we scroll down here, they did another literature review, a meta-analysis, okay, on studies of carbon dioxide dilution of plant nutrients. This is how they did the literature analysis and review. Here are your citations, okay, the locations where these occurred, time frame element. Look at this. Plants with declining concentrations of key elements, nutrients, and minerals. Trees, forbs, legumes, wheat, woody species, non-woody species. All right, all in this column. They also observed crops, barley, wheat, grass, forbs, woody species, wheat, pollen, maize, peeps, rapeseed. There are some that reported no change in concentrations over time. All right. But if you look at the number of species that reported a decrease in concentrations of key elements and minerals, there are much more in this column than in this column, which is no change in concentrations. So what we're seeing is most studies across the world, in Europe, in Asia, Australia, and the United States, have reported decreasing levels of major elements, including nitrogen, calcium, copper, iron, potassium, magnesium, zinc. This is a problem. What are we going to do about this? How is this going to affect herbivorous animals over time? All right, we don't really know. And we all know that insects have been disappearing at a very concerning rate. But until this study came out, we didn't really have a great hypothesis about it. I mean, we knew that pesticides were a factor in some areas. Climate change and temperature was likely a factor. But again, it didn't explain all of it. All right, so over time, our plants are becoming less nutritious, and the animals and the insects that are feeding on them, we don't really know how that's going to affect them. So sorry to be the bearer of bad news, but you have it. There you have it. If you have any questions, feel free to contact me. That's pretty much it.